This is the XRM Toolcast with business applications MVPs Daryl Labar and Jonas Rapp. The podcast focused on tools available for Microsoft business applications. This podcast is brought to you by Maplytics by Nowgic. Maplytics by Nowgic is a market-leading certified for Microsoft Dynamics 365 geoanalytical mapping app. Maplytics empowers users with powerful map visualization and routing capabilities within Dynamics CRM to drive better sales, improve business processes, and engage the right customers at the right time. Maplytics now works with Dynamics 365 version 9 and Dynamics 365 app for mobile and tablet. We thank Maplytics by Nowgic for sponsoring the XRM Toolcast from CRM Audio.
Welcome everyone to episode 2 of the XRM Toolcast. I'm here with Jonas, who happens to be stateside this time, which is nice. And we are going to be focusing today on our first listener question, which is quite exciting. Our first listener question comes from Seth T. Bacon, who I met at a recent conference and immediately liked. I don't know if it's because his name was Bacon or because he said I did a good job in my presentation. I don't know which. Maybe it's both. But he asks, how does Microsoft view and encourage the XRM Toolbox? And so we've brought on a guest today to help answer this question for us. And our guest is none other than Matt Barbour, the Principal Platform Architect, Common Data Services for Application Platform Manager at Microsoft. So Matt, welcome to the XRM Toolcast.
Thanks for having me.
So do you want to go ahead and give a quick 30-second introduction for those that may not be aware who you are?
Sure. Again, my name is Matt Barbour. I'm a Principal Architect. I'm over the Common Data Services area. However, I have a kind of a wider purview across all of the business applications space insofar as how it works with the Common Data Service.
So the actual question here, from Mr. Bacon is how does Microsoft view and encourage the XRM Toolbox? What's your answer?
As far as the XRM Toolbox is concerned, and I should extend this to pretty much any partner-developed tool in the ecosystem, Microsoft's position on it is as long as it's using our supported APIs and are supported and is supported within the scope of our policies, we have no issue with it at all. And what does that mean? It means that we publish a set of documented APIs. We publish a set of patterns for development. We publish a set of schema elements. And as long as a tool complies with that, we have no issue. In fact, in a lot of cases, we use some of our partner-developed tools even internally.
Don't you feel afraid that, these tools empower users and admins to do stuff that could potentially, they do more than they usually should using the out-of-the-box user interface. They can mess up the system quite easily instead of doing it in a quite hard way using the out-of-the-box. So it makes it easier to do things that will affect the system in ways they were not intended to.
So again, we put the controls to protect the system from you or protect the system from itself are actually built into the API layer of the system. So when a partner, an interested individual chooses to develop a tool for something like the XRM Toolbox, it still has to comply with the API, and those controls are enforced there. Now, does it mean that they don't see the warnings that we put in front of the tools we provide? For example, classic example of this is plugin registration. We know and have put documentation as well as alerts in the tools that we provide that if you try to register a plugin on everything, there is going to be a performance problem. We unequivocally know that. However, we still allow it. And the reason we still allow it is there are use cases where that does make sense to do. And at some point when we deduce that there is no longer a use case for that, we will block that at the API level, which will in turn downstream block it from being done by any third-party tools.
And also speaking about tools that, like the plugin registration, there's the official one from Microsoft, and there's the one in XRM Toolbox that's based on the last version where the code was open for 2011. What are you working on? Can you say anything about what you're working on that might make some existing open sourced or community tools obsolete in the future?
Loaded question. There are a number of tools and efforts that I should say just differently. There are a number of efforts ongoing within our tools team that will build official versions of some of the tools that exist on XRM Toolbox. Now, whether or not They follow the pattern that we have been, where we ship the tool compiled and in binary form and therefore fully consumable by pretty much anybody, or ship it as source code, as we used to do with the plugin registration tool, requiring you to compile it. That is yet to be determined. Our tools, the tools that our tools teams build, also have to comply with the public API. So they meet the same, if you will, bar that's enforced on the third-party tools. That said, of course, the tools teams that are working inside the group do have the advantage of actually being able to sit down the hall from the teams that are building those APIs they're interfacing with, and can know ahead, I guess, is anticipate and or have a bit of a future vision as to things that need to be done a certain way, and we'll build our tools accordingly. But again, it is intended to be a collaborative environment. We have no intention of trying to block anything out. We have a pretty good working relationship with the community, I'd say. We've had one incident in the past where there was a tool that was built that was using something in our API space that shouldn't have been, and once we made the developer aware of it, they resolved it very quickly. Looking forward to that kind of relationship.
So if you're a .NET developer, and or maybe even a TypeScript developer, you're used to your tools and your whole ASP.NET world being open source to begin with. In Power Apps, we don't have the luxury because this is something that Microsoft's actually selling. But is there any possibility in the future of maybe some of these tools in the SDK to be at least open sourceable? Because that's not something that is a money-making thing at all for Microsoft. It's something they give freely as a part of the SDK, and it's something that, for instance, in the early bound generator, I wanted to add functionality to support the multi-select option sets that came out last year, and the CRMS SDK util does not support that in a way that I was happy with, and so I had to do a lot of kind of hacking around in the actual code in order to get it to generate the way that I want it to generate, still using the CRM service util. So is there any possibility of having any of those tools that are in the SDK or any potential future tools open source in such a way that we could have pull requests that we give and have Microsoft rule over, yes, we want to include that, or no, we don't?
The discussion as to whether open source the tools in general is an ongoing discussion. The tools team will make that decision, hopefully before too long, and move forward from there. So it isn't an unequivocal no, it isn't an unequivocal yes, it's a strong maybe right now. And a lot of, again, pointing back to the XRM Toolbox as an example, there's a lot of really strong community development out there that has approached problems that you guys have faced in rather innovative ways that give a much better insight into some of the needs of the tool system than necessarily our internal application developers who are focused in on building, end-to-end first-class apps versus trying to solve a point problem. With regard to just calling out the particular issue that you're referring to, with regard to that problem actually wasn't necessarily in the CRM service util. That problem is actually 2 or 3 steps lower in the stack, and is something that actually plagues a number of our tools. The DMT, the configuration migration tool, for example, had a similar challenge, which we had to solve for.
My understanding was the actual metadata itself it was not treating it as an actual option set when it should have been. And if I just had the one flag flipped, it would have resolved half my problem. But maybe it's something else we're thinking of as well.
Mm-hmm.
So circling back to the tool development efforts that you have at Microsoft, of course you have some roadmap and it get changed over time and so on. But would you say that the community efforts have also affected your roadmap internally when you see that, okay, here's something community effort being put into solving some problem, and then you can sort of wait a bit, deprioritize that feature in your own roadmap?
Probably the ribbon workbench should be the number one example of that.
Yeah, there's a couple like that. Yeah, yes, and that's more of a historical yes. In the past, we've relied heavily on the community to help fill the tooling gaps. Again, we've staffed up an organization within our groups focused on this job. So we hope to close the need for the community to invent features and capabilities from a tooling perspective that should be innate to our product. It's something that we are very, very focused on, and hopefully you'll see a lot of, I would hope, good work with regard to the community acceptance of the tools that we provide in the coming months.
Awesome.
Given this with the community tools, does Microsoft keep an active eye on what's happening out there, or is it more on when they stumble upon something? It could be from a support case, could be from someone in the community asking Microsoft about, like Daryl asked about what's with the CRM Service Util, or do you actively try to track what's happening out there?
There is a population of tools out there that we do actively track. We pay attention to what's going on in that community for two reasons. First, when we do decide to change something in the core platform that we know will affect the tool, we try to be proactive about that. We try to let the tool developer know that there's an upcoming change and this is what needs to be done to adopt that change. Now, we've tried to compartmentalize that as much as possible, and the fact that we now ship the major parts of the API and the .NET side of it, at least, as NuGet packages, so they can be easily consumed by the tooling community. But we do, as I said, keep a fairly active eye on what's going on. Now, that said, it is not unusual for some new tool to have cropped up and suddenly show up in a ticket or a support case, which then gets added to our what was that list. And let's go take a look at who did that and what were they trying to do.
So the what's that list is the step before the blacklist.
It is not the blacklist. No, there's no blacklist.
Okay. And are there any areas that you feel that the community tooling should stay away from? Like you mentioned, there was one tool in the XRM toolbox that had to be revoked. Are there any other areas where you feel is our domain? We will provide you with what you need. Don't go there.
So just calling out to that particular one in XRM toolbox. No, there wasn't. It didn't need to be revoked. It needed to be revised. The tool had actually exposed access to part of our management API that was called out in our documentation as explicitly Microsoft internal use only. And the developer had figured out how to talk to it and had published a tool, which didn't work half the time. And that was, again, that was a scenario that when we realized that was one of those scenarios that showed up through a ticket. We had a customer that was complaining about it. As far as don't go there, there is no such realm, as far as I'm concerned. If there is a hole, there's a need, you think you need to fill it, then do it. If you think you can do it better than we can, then do it. We provide the API for a purpose. Now, keep in mind that in the case of the tools that we do provide ongoing support for them. We maintain them, we service them, we look after them. And in the case of a community developed tool, that sometimes happens and sometimes not. There's a large number of tools that get built out that are very, very pointed. They do one task and they do it relatively well. And then the developer who developed it disappears or moves on. And that's the risk with the community tool. Less so when the developer in question chooses to use an open source methodology and provides the ability for the community to take over that tool and maintain it. And that is definitely a case for open source in the tooling space.
So do you have a favorite or maybe least favorite third-party tool? And does maybe Microsoft, the development team, the internal team, have a favorite or least favorite tool in the toolbox? And the toolbox just overall?
I can't actually speak to that. Mainly because I don't particularly have a favorite, and I don't play favorites for third-party tools on the inside. I point our developer resources to the tools. They use and come back with comments and suggestions about some of those tools. If I were to say probably the most popular tool inside Microsoft that I'm aware of is the Ribbon Workbench. That is something that is used pretty extensively. Probably followed up... No, I'd have to say it's the Ribbon Workbench. I'm just thinking about what the number 2 is, and it basically is the plugin registration debugging experience, the Ribbon Workbench, and then it just goes horizontal at that point with a number of different tools.
Both Daryl and I are sitting here waiting for you to call out our tools.
Sorry.
I heard something about debugging there. I'm thinking you're using the plugin trace viewer. I think you do that.
But we gave you an API to make the plugin trace viewer work.
Yeah.
So
I was afraid that you're going to pick the attribute manager as the least favorite, because I'm sure there's been plenty of environments that have gotten hosed by some of the stuff that goes on underneath the covers there.
Yes, but if you take a look at the attribute manager is actually a really good example. So if you take a look at what we've now done in the maker experience, web.powerapps.com, as far as managing entities and working with entities now and their attributes. That's an example where we've started bringing forward some of that understanding, and people are using these tools for these reasons, and these are the things, these are the big pain points that people want to get solved. And we, instead of building an independent tool, we've actually brought that in to the maker experiences and are bringing that forward that way.
Well, if I don't have to maintain that, I'm happy, so that's good.
So there you go.
And I think now that we have you in the room, Matt, me and Daryl come from backgrounds of sort of the two different paths. I've always done my C# coding late bound, and Daryl is always
No, don't be nice to
early
Jonas.
bound.
I want your true answer here, what the right answer is.
So we've created our own tools for this. Daryl has the early bound generator. I have the late bound constants generator. So do you see, is there a right and a wrong here, or are there, as usual, it depends, different scenarios require different approaches? Or could you settle this once and for all, or do we have to continue fighting?
Well, I'm sorry to say you're going to have to continue fighting.
Oh, we kind of like that.
It is very much an it depends. Speaking to late bound, the late bound capabilities definitely provide the more flexibility within the environment. You're far less sensitive to the differences between environments and instances. That said, you have to maintain, the downside of that is you have to maintain that constant, in your case, the constants list, or you have to maintain the string collections of names and entities and whatnot. And from a programming and management point of view, it does provide a considerable amount of overhead. On the other hand, it does provide you the ability to script a lot of that, because you can drive entity, attribute, assignment, data object, data record creation strictly by modeling a document and then passing the document to the generator, which in turn writes the data. In the CRM service util, which is something we provide, there is a helper called create entity. And create entity takes a dictionary, which is truly a key value pair collection, and it assembles it using late binding. Okay, it is highly flexible and it works up and down various versions. Now, coming around to talk about the early binding concept, the early binding concept really yields itself to the rapid application developer, the developer that really likes the dot notation feature sets. And I have to say, having used both, extensively used both, if I'm trying to communicate a subject or build maintainable code, a lot of times the early bound generator is easier because it's a class structured object that can be translated. There's also benefits in the early bound system as far as how the link queue interface, the link queue query system works with it, although it does then again rely on the WCF binding concepts to make that work. And as we've extended and expanded the system, those of you using older versions of our API have likely experienced issues with that occasionally. Where we've added something and the old version of the API doesn't understand how to deal with it. You have to upgrade the core assembly, the Microsoft.xrm SDK assembly, and then it all starts working for you. But again, they both have their place. In the case of the early bound, talking about the maintainability aspect of it, again, it is something that you have to be cognitively aware of as far as what your environment is connected to. So if you are an SI or you're an ISV or you're a customer and you know what your target is, you're importing that schema. You know what's going to be there. An early binding structure works really well for that because there's no variability in it. Conversely, if you don't know, a late binding schema works a bit better unless you're relying on core objects in the system. We have worked pretty hard on the platform side to actually make the link queue aspect of that system and the data binding aspect of that system a bit more resilient to missing data for early bound objects. And under the covers, as we've said repeatedly, there is a performance challenge. Well, it's not so much a challenge, it's a performance penalty you pay for serialization. Because at the end of the day, what we're sending across the wire is an org service request. It is an execute with a message and a set of properties. And whether or not you are creating a late bound object, which is essentially that, or an early bound object, which is a classified version of that, it still has to be serialized to that and sent across the wire.
Thanks. I think we're approaching the end here. I know your time is valuable. Just do you have any news for us regarding the developer toolkit for Visual Studio 2017 or 2019? Is there light at the end of the tunnel?
Yes, there is light. I don't have anything I can share with you at this time. Although for here in the room, I can flip it around and actually show you it all working. I have a version of it that works on my desktop.
Didn't I hear that 2 years ago?
You did hear that 2 years ago, and it's been continued and worked on consistently. But as far as public release of a toolkit, I can't say anything right now aside from the fact that, yes, it is a very hot subject. It is being worked. Hopefully we'll have something to share with, gosh, I'd really like to be able to say that the beginning of next year. So the spring of 2019 would be really awesome if we could share some stuff there, but I don't know where we're going to land with that just yet. I don't own it any longer, so.
If you're looking for a place to come out and talk about it, that a first live speaking to the world about this, feel free to come back. We'll be happy to have you back, and you can come back and share to the world the new news if you'd like, Matt. Well, thank you very much, Matt, for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's all that we have scheduled for today. If you need to get a hold of us, we do have a Twitter account at XRMToolcast. You can also email us at cast@xrmtoolbox.com. We love hearing your suggestions, questions, and any helpful tips or things you would like us to talk about next. Always looking for that, and always look forward to hearing any of your comments, both positive and negative. So thank you very much for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
So we haven't solved this early bound, late bound battle. I will say that he did concede that he did see a lot of advantages to doing early bound development. And
I heard him say a lot of advantages to late bound, actually.
Well, that's I don't. You heard, maybe you have selective hearing, but I selectively heard that the early bound was the way to go.
This has been the XRM Toolcast with Business Applications MVPs Jonas Rapp and Daryl Labar. The podcast is about tools available for Microsoft Business Applications. Do you have any questions for Daryl and Jonas? Send them an email at cast@xrmtoolbox.com. This episode is a production of Dynamics Podcast, LLC.